Welcome back to our lesson today, which is lesson 5 of your workbook. So if you can turn to that lesson, it's on secret motives. And do you really want to reconcile this mindset that you have? And it's the first part of our second section of the workbook of Where's Your Heart? And as we go through this, listen up real good, because there's a lot of things in here that we'll be talking about that you probably don't think about much of, but they're inside, and we will try to help you learn about some of the things that can help you have a better relationship.
And remember, as we've been saying, that really this is more about you and God than it is about your spouse. And in this week's lesson, we ask you to look at the issue of motives. And like we've been saying, using the examples of actors on a stage, remember that God is the great director of your life, and He knows all your motives. So at times, we might be fooling everyone around us. We might be pretending like everything's fine, or, acting like we're not upset about something. But if we're doing that and we're not being real with each other, and we're pretending, we call it polite pretending, as Gary Thomas says in his book, actually the marriage will end up blowing apart.
There was times when Michelle and I were separated that she would come over and I would misread her intentions for coming over to see me. I thought it was, we're ready to go back together, but that would be my thinking, not hers. And so, I would get frustrated and she would leave and I would misunderstand her. So that was my opportunity that I figured out finally that I needed to go to God, and I needed to learn to love God more, to learn that marriage that I had with Jesus, love Him more than I really loved her. Now that's a hard concept to get, but when I focused on her, things would go bad. When I focused on Jesus, things would start going good. So, it depends on what do you want, what's your motive. Well, we also have this motive that lives inside us called the Holy Spirit. And the motive of the Holy Spirit is to love the Lord, give Him glory. And so that was one thing I learned through that process.
And I bet some of you listening right now might identify, there were times that I wanted to go back to you. I mean, I missed being married, I missed our relationship together, and so then I would start drawing close, and then, but when I would start drawing close to Joe, and he would start to misread, because really what I wanted to do is just spend time, but then he would misread that and think that it meant that I was ready to move right back together, but we still had so many problems. And honey, I think you just didn't really understand me.
Yeah, well, that's what I always tell the guys, because I get this when I talk with the guys, that 2 times in a man's life he'll never understand a woman. And you're probably asking yourself, what times are those? Well, it's before marriage and after marriage.
Well, hey, you know what? Gals, aren't there 2 times that we don't understand men?
So that's where I had to learn through that process that I had to go to the one that created the woman, created your woman, that you love, and go to the Bible to read how to understand how God created her to be. Couldn't go to her because I couldn't understand that way, but if I went to Him, the creator of that woman, then I could get that understanding that I need of how I needed to be with her.
But seriously, in this week's lesson, the thing that truly started us back on the road of reconciliation was when we started getting things out in the open. And if you're reading our Yes, Your Marriage Can Be Saved book, remember that the weeks are flipped. So that would be week 4, chapter 4 in the Yes book, as we like to call the book, and lesson 5. But that's when we really started working on getting things out in the open and starting to take that risk to be real with each other. And one of the things that we've been finding as we've been counseling couples and meeting with couples is that the very thing that they fear, like if you're trying to pretend with your spouse like everything's okay, that's probably the one thing that's really causing your marriage to get into crisis. And, it's kind of sad how that happens, because we really want to be loved, and yet the very thing that we're doing, thinking that we're going to save the marriage, is the one thing that blows it apart.
Yeah, and the one thing that I would like to remind you, if you go back to chapter 3, there's a little focus meter that's on our Yes book, a picture of the focus meter. If you wanted to take, I think it's a big help, if you take a photocopy of that and put it on hard paper or get it laminated and put a little paper clip on it, you can actually take that around with you, and it'll help you stay focused. A lot of guys have done that, and they put it on their car and their Bible, use it as a bookmark. So,
yeah, that is a good idea.
Right. So you just need to that was one of my issues. It was my focus. When she would come over to the house, my focus would go directly to her, which would start actually, having her wanting to pull away when I needed to learn that my focus still, even when we're together, my focus still needs to be on the Lord.
And remember, too, that we've also said, and we say it in the book and workbook, that God will even use wrong motives. So if you came to class and you're sitting there right now, maybe on the outside you're smiling, you're sitting there and pretending like everything's fine, or maybe you're sitting there with your arms folded. I mean, I remember Debbie Johnson, they're in this week's lesson and in the book. I remember her actually sitting there with her arms folded. And guess what? God even used wrong motives in the class. They are our national co-leaders now. So whatever reasons that that you list in our tool this week in 5A, that you're afraid to reconcile, we want you to learn to keep your focus on God, because He'll even use those wrong motives to save your marriage.
As we fill up that toolbox with our tools, each week we give you these tools. Even Michelle and I have to go back to that toolbox once in a while. We go back to and overview these and go, what have I missed this week? Maybe I need to use this tool. But to help, you can continue to go back and pull out the tools that you need at the time you need them, which will really help you out. And so go to the scriptures and just kind of condition yourself. And it takes time and it takes practice to do that.
Now, next week, we're going to take you into week 6, and the workbook and the Yes book will coincide. It's probably one of the strongest lessons that you're going to get out of this class, because you're going to be able to use it in so many other relationships. It's the one on anger. So please do your best. You're halfway through the workbook right now, and class or small group, however you're going through this study. So make sure that you prepare yourself for next week's lesson. Read chapter 6 in the book if possible, and definitely do week 6 in your workbook, because you've got an enemy of this world that doesn't want you to have a close relationship with God, and certainly doesn't want your marriage to make it. So keep your commitment to stay with us, and we'll prepare you as we get you into this next section.
So remember to, as you start going through this section, review if you want to the first lessons. They're fairly easy to review, and then pray constantly, and give your thanks to God. Let your requests be made known to Him, and He will be with you. And we'll see you in the next lesson.
See you next week.